Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Transitions for More. I'm your host, Mike Urgo, a Marine Corps veteran. I've returned from Iraq and faced the challenges of PTSD, addiction, and grief to create a new life that is balanced and healthy in mind, body, and spirit. Each episode, I'll share some of my journey or interview inspiring veterans and subject matter experts to help us find that purpose and connection we all crave. You guys can follow the show on Instagram at Transitions for More. Join our TFW page on Facebook, Twitter, and transitionsformore.com. If you have any questions, comments, or topic ideas, feel free to email me at mike@transitionsformore.com. If you guys enjoy the show, please leave us a rating and review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, you guys, today my guest is Faith Harper. Faith is a badass licensed professional counselor, board supervisor, certified sexologist, and applied clinical nutritionist with a private practice and consulting business in San Antonio, Texas. She is the author of the book Unfuck Your Brain and many other popular zines and books on subjects such as anxiety, depression, and grief. I had a lot of fun talking with Faith. This is one of my favorite episodes to date, you guys. You're really going to enjoy this. I'll put links to Faith's info in the show so you can connect with her if you want to learn more or if you want to find out where you can get her books. We talk a lot about her latest book, Unfuck Your Boundaries. Without any more dilly-dally, let's get to the interview. So Faith, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for taking your time to be on Transitions for More.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So I first came across you and your work and your book about depression. And I knew I was going to like it when within the first few sentences you said, depression is a motherfucker. And I said, I think she gets it. And I don't think we're like, it was so refreshing, especially me being in the therapy world too, where we can just say things like fuck and shit and the things we're actually thinking. Mm-hmm. You've written quite a few books, mm-hmm. A couple of I've listened to and one I have, your newest one, Unfuck Your Boundaries. So I think today maybe we'll just talk about a lot of the different things in the mental health world, especially some of the buzzwords. Things I've heard way too much and get misconstrued as words like healing, trauma, depression, anxiety. When you think of healing or when you think of trauma, can you define those terms for us?
Sure. I think we misdefine trauma pretty regularly, and I'm sure you know this from your work. Trauma is a nervous system injury. We think of it as a mental health issue, but it's really an injury to the body and mind caused by an event that was sort of out of the realm of expectation and normal experience, and that we didn't get a chance to heal from. And so we hold it. It doesn't just affect our thoughts and feelings, it affects our physical body. It's something that we're continuously holding somatically and dealing with. I think healing comes when we hit that place that we're no longer victims and we have rightfully claimed our spot as survivors. It doesn't mean that we weren't affected. I don't believe in that spiritual bypassing bullshit of, there was a reason for this and, God wanted me to have it. Yeah. I'm like, no, God is not an asshole. That's not how it works. Horrible things happen because they do. But when we find, and sometimes we find a greater meaning or we learn a lesson from it, and that's kind of bonus points. But I think the real healing comes from when we reclaim our lives and see ourselves as survivors of something awful, and we're no longer being continuously victimized because we're continuing to hold that injury in our nervous system. Does that answer your question?
That answers my question, and I think it opens up for a lot of things we can talk about. So, a lot of people might think, especially with trauma, why don't you just get over it, or why don't you just think about something else?
Which always works so well. Tell me to get over it. Oh, fuck. Why didn't I think get over it? I'm better. So thank you so much. Yes.
I saw this post you put up of when someone told me just to get over my anxiety, and I'm cured.
Yeah.
And I had tears. I was laughing so hard because I didn't think of that.
Yeah.
So explaining to people, just how it's a different part of your brain gets triggered and sends that, that fight or flight response to your body before you have like a conscious thought. And the prefrontal cortex is, it can be, eye-opening for some people to say, oh, I really don't have a choice of how my body reacts in these situations. Let's talk for a second about the difference between being a victim and being a survivor, because I think this gets missed a lot. So
Yeah. Well, and I'm not diminishing victimhood, because if we survive a traumatic event, we are victimized by that traumatic event. Fucked up shit happens, and we are victims of these circumstances. And the victimization is what occurs in the moment and those immediate after effects. And what happens when the body doesn't find a way to make sense of that, and it's something we continue to hold, is this is going to be my continued circumstances, and I have to respond as if I'm still in that moment. That's when we're carrying victimization forward into our present and our future, rather than going, this is something that I survived. It's like we're storytelling creatures. We need to find a way to make sense of the story and give it its proper place and meaning. And when we do that, we can story ourselves as survivors, and we're no longer holding that as something that's happening in the present. When we have PTSD or some kind of trauma reaction, we're holding the past in the present. And the therapeutic work is to let go of that, and so we can be in the present without bringing the past into it.
I think one thing also you mentioned before, the term spiritual bypass, which is something that drives me fucking crazy. Especially there's a lot of, I think, uplifting motivational posts on social media or well-meaning people.
The Love and
But
Light Brigade. Yes, the Love and Light Brigade.
So you've come across this.
Yes.
Yes, of course.
And I teach yoga, but I do not like the Love and Light Brigade.
It's so difficult, and sometimes it makes me want to just fucking vomit. Listening to people say like things like that, like, oh, everything happened for a reason, or God will never give you more than you can handle, and as if there was some kind of I don't know, karma for what we're experiencing, like we deserved it. And that is it's so aggravating, especially talking with people who are living with trauma or survived some horrific shit. How can you tell when someone is, or can you first define the term spiritual bypass?
Yeah, I mean, and you pretty much just did. Spiritual bypassing is a term that we sort of lessen our reality by saying it has this grander karmic meaning, that if we go, oh, well, cancer was just the lesson that I needed to learn, or and it's sort of, rather than dealing with the really grungy shit that happens when you live a human life, and just be like, yeah, this is how it is, because life is fucking hard and really horrible things happen. And sometimes people just suck and there's no meaning in it. It's just, it's just the reality of being human. And when we bypass that, the grittiness of human reality is spiritual bypassing, giving it some greater karmic meaning. And I also think it's unfair for anybody who has any kind of spiritual life, if you have a higher power deity you believe in, to think that they're some kind of asshole, that they're going to do that. Yeah, I'm going to kill your kid because I need you to learn a lesson. Oh my God, who would? I mean, who would believe in a God that does that? He's not a.
It's like everybody is Job and getting tested. Be like, wow, you're still obedient to me, my faithful servant.
Right?
Good job.
Yeah.
Let's put some more fucked up shit to see what happens.
Yeah, that's not how it works. But because we need to make meaning of our situation, sometimes that's the meaning that's made of it, but it doesn't let us do the real work of being human.
So essentially, a big part of what I think understand about spiritual bypassing is how it's involves more about thinking instead of the feeling and experiencing. So like you said, you're getting past the actual experiencing of grief. If we lose somebody close to us, and instead of just like a spiritual bypass would be, well, why don't we just celebrate that person's life?
They're in a
Or
better
why don't we,
place now. Yes. That kind of stuff. It's, yeah, exactly that.
why do we do this? Why do we do this spiritual bypass?
Because part of it is our, sort of that need for story of trying to make sense to it. I think we think if we create this story around it, the sort of spiritual bypass, there's a meaning in this story, we think we'll feel better, but really it's like holding a beach ball underwater. Like it's not going to work
Yeah.
for that long.
Yeah.
You can spend all your time holding that beach ball underwater, but eventually it's going to pop up and hit you in the face. But I think it's like trying to sort of make sense of that, of what happened to us in a simplified way. And a lot of time we believe it because other people feed it to us, because it's their own discomfort with our grief and our process and our trauma and our depression and our anxiety. People have a hard time sitting with other people in pain. And for very
That
good
is so
reasons.
true.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
because when we feel other people's pain, we feel with them, and so we want them to feel better, so we can feel better. So we sort of create these simplified healing strategies rather than just letting people be in pain. And I think a lot of times it's selfish. It's not an unkind selfishness, but because we feel with people and we're neuroceptively attached to them, we want them to feel better, so we give them these kind of bullshit stories so they'll feel better, so we can feel better for them.
Right. It's kind of just speeding up an uncomfortable process of feeling someone else's pain, or that empathy. That's such a big thing. I work with a lot of Gold Star families, and that is one of the things they tell me so often, is that people are just so uncomfortable around them.
Mhm.
I mean, maybe there'll be a lot of support during the funeral, but then afterwards they'll just want to avoid them
Mhm.
because of that. So they're, they lose their child or a family member, and then all of a sudden they lose their community because everyone is just kind of, sees them and says, I don't want to deal with this.
Mhm. Yeah, they're either avoidant or they're helpful in ways that aren't helpful. And I'm also a widow, so I've been through that, of people bringing me a ham. I didn't want a ham. Just like people trying to
Yeah.
make themselves feel better about what they're going through. And either it's so uncomfortable that they disengage entirely, or they do things that is completely unhelpful. It seems to be one end or the other, versus saying, hey, I thought that these are things that might be helpful, but I don't need to do something to make myself feel better. What would be helpful for you? And gently staying in touch. My best friend who had lost his spouse the year before, who's so really got it, if I dropped a ball of all my balls in the air, rather than giving me shit, he would say, hey, that's something I could have helped with. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just we can be gently supportive and offer things, but not about making us feel better, but things that are actually helpful to the person. And people don't even necessarily need to talk. They just need somebody to be with them and not talk, or somebody to go with them to the fucking movies or go hiking. We did so much hiking when he lost his husband, and then the year later when I lost mine, we hiked for miles and miles and miles, not talking about the deaths of our spouses. We need people to be there with us. We don't need them to resolve things for us.
Oh, that can, speaking of things that they're the absolute worst, is when we have the well-intentioned friend or family member trying to be, just that, I don't know, self-made therapist,
Yes.
and say, like, well, you just need to talk about it. So much I've gotten doing my own work on my own shit through physical activity and just letting my body process things just by doing it and moving. So a couple of things I want to know, what are some things we can do to validate other people's suffering, or our own suffering, but not let them or us fall into self-pity or pitying someone?
Well, I think that, we need to, kind of like we were talking about, not try to over explain it and just hold space for it. I mean, sometimes just like, yeah, that's a lot. That really sucks. You're going through a lot right now, without saying, oh, I understand. Or, And you might have a very similar experience of saying, I don't understand your exact experience, but I've had enough similar experiences that I have an inkling of what you're going through right now. Stuff like that. That's not, telling people how to be or what to do, but also, what are some things that would be helpful right now that, we know that, first of all, the stages of grief, it's not a stage-wise system. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross created it to explain the stages of dying, and dying has an endpoint. Grief doesn't. So it's a recursive thing. So not, I love the book, It's Okay That You're Not Okay.
Yeah.
It talks a lot about how, you may be depressed, and then you may be angry, and then you may be okay for a while, and then you go back to depressed. And, understanding that and letting people do the work, but also, being the good friend of like, hey, you hadn't gotten out of bed all week, and I love you, and I'm worried about you, and I get why. But how about I come over with some soup, and we'll come sit in the bed together, and if you eat the soup, maybe you'll feel like getting up and showering. How can we gently propel people forward by understanding where they are?
That's a good point. Yeah. And again, it seems like it's so annoying when you get the person who maybe reads on the internet a post about the stages of death or grief, and they might ask you, okay, well, I think you already went through the anger stage, so you should be around here. You should be in the depression. I'm like, no, just
Thank you,
back
Dr.
off that for a
Freud.
little while.
Yeah, no, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I know. Um, so it's talking about what we need and what we don't want or don't need. Probably a good segue into boundaries. What is it about boundaries that are so complicated, and what is it about boundaries that a lot of us are missing? And how do we fuck them up, and how do we unfuck them?
Well, so it came from, I written a little bit about this in my relationship book, which is called Unfuck Your Intimacy. And I had done a little zine about boundaries, and we realized that this was coming up over and over and over again for people. Like a lot of these sort of basic relational issues were coming down to boundaries. But we don't really have a clear idea of what that means. Again, that's another thing that the Love and Light Brigade likes to post a lot about, is about boundaries, but nobody's talking about it in this like really functional, pragmatic way.
Yeah.
I remember I was having a conversation with a client a few months ago. I'm like, boundaries are just your everyday expression of consent, girl. Like, you're overthinking it. And she kind of had this, wait, what epiphany moment that, like nobody had ever talked about that sort of pragmatically. So I knew I wanted to write about it from like this, how do our boundaries get fucked up? It can be trauma shit. It can be our attachment styles growing up. I mean, there's a lot of different things going on to think about, sort of the main things I kept seeing over and over as a therapist that tended to be boundary busters, and then how to work with that. And dealing with, there's some stuff in there about working with coercive control. There are forms of very insidious abuse that are completely legal. And a lot of people are victimized by that. And I also wanted to talk about like also not just dealing with boundaries with people who like, oh, I didn't understand that was a boundary. Thank you for telling me. I will respect it. But how do you deal with people that are very high conflict? And so I kind of, all the sort of practical strategies that I've used, not just with clients, but like with students and interns over the years, of teaching them how to like, communicate in the world with, but of like, I have so many conversations that I'd had with interns, like they were working in, toxic work environments, and I was having to teach them how to communicate with somebody who's a high conflict personality. Like, no, you're answering too much in that email. Just say this, 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 and this, and so that was a lot of the stuff that I wanted to put in there that I just kept seeing be an issue over and over for people.
Yeah, it seems like boundaries come up. Well, especially when we're talking about consent or sexual relationships, especially like with the emergence of the Me Too movement.
Mhm.
But in everyday relationships, it sounds like it's kind of a, like you said, the term's not really defined.
Mhm.
It's has not talked about a lot. I would say I'm a classic people pleaser. So boundaries have been a thing I've been working on too, of how to negotiate the world to get what I want out of it, and not do or say things that compromise how I feel about myself or my situation. What are some of the common ways people let themselves get walked on, or just don't have healthy boundaries?
Well, I mean, like you just said, people pleasing, or whether that sort of be your natural inclination, if you're like an Enneagram type 2 person, or that that's something that you were trained to do, that was your, your role in your family, or, you come from that kind of history in general. We have a tendency with boundaries, there's kind of that baby bear just right category that we're all trying to get to, where our boundaries are flexible. But on either side of that, we have boundaries that are too rigid, where you're like, I got fucked over. Nope, nope, not going to deal with anyone ever again. Everyone can go fuck themselves. And then too permeable, where everything gets through, where, people can sort of push and manipulate and wheedle and get stuff from you, or you're not listening to that internal core self of like, no, I don't want to do this. I don't have the spoons for this. I don't have the bandwidth for this, and being able to communicate that. And we want that middle space where we can sort of challenge our growth, but we're not getting stomped on in the process. The book talks about like all different kinds of boundaries. What's the difference between an intellectual boundary and an emotional one and a spiritual one and a physical one and a sexual one? Because I don't think we've really had those conversations about all of those different ways of like, what's our core selfness, and how do we get that chipped away at by other people when we're not holding that as kind of our fundamental. And there's like values exercises and that, so people can kind of figure that out. And the question I've had with clients before, I've had clients coming in pissed, like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that and I'm going to hide money before the divorce, well, kind of stuff. And I'm like, 10 years from now, are you going to be really embarrassed by your behavior? And they're like,
Yeah, good point.
yeah. And he's like, oh. And I'm like, don't do things that go against like your core morality. So pay attention to what that is and operate from that. And it's okay, like, if you make the best decision you can with the information you have at the time, look back on 10 years ago, I'm like, yeah, if I'd known differently, I would have done differently. I didn't. But there's like, I knew better and I just decided to be a dick, or I didn't hold boundaries. And so I ended up doing stuff that I didn't want to do because I let someone push me around, because that's sort of been my history and I hadn't done my work around it or whatever. And that's where we start getting, out of sync with who we are as a human being.
I love that, because it does come down to our own values and how we actually feel about how we're interacting with people. I've seen those get eroded with people who are maybe used to, I don't know, keeping the peace, like in a family, and so the people pleasing comes in handy as a skill, or their brain is telling them one thing and their body is telling them something totally different,
Mm-hmm.
and so they figure out like, well, I don't understand what my body is saying, so let's just try to rationalize this to
Mm-hmm.
death, and and do what makes sense, but at the same time still feel just fucking terrible about my own actions in
Mm-hmm.
this. What I love too is the fact that I think I don't it's not really in the zeitgeist, or it's not really in the discussion today about like what actually healthy boundaries look like. I've mostly heard just the phrase, well, I don't think you have healthy boundaries, being thrown around, but then never really defining the terms.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think it looks like to have, healthy boundaries just every day, let's say like in a working environment? And what are some of the ways that, I mean, maybe these boundaries get violated that we might not be aware of?
Well, and the book, and actually the workbook just came in last night, so you probably haven't seen
I
it
saw
yet.
pictures. I'm excited.
Yeah. Um, and that's so individualized. And, and that's part of the hard work. It would be really cool if we had like a, top 10 commandments of boundaries. I have a 10 commandments for consent. Boundaries is a little bit more nebulous. So I put in a lot of activities about like, what's your personal bill of rights? What are your I don't have to type statements, talking about those kinds of things, because it's so individual. Like, I don't think you have healthy boundaries as compared to what? I'm
Right.
I'm native. I'm from a collectivist, matriarchal type culture. Our boundaries are going to be very different from sort of the general norm in the US. Does that mean that I don't have healthy boundaries, or do I have culturally appropriate boundaries? So we have to kind of take context into consideration
Yeah.
as
So
well.
recognizing our own culture, our own values. It's not a one size fits all
Right.
thing.
People like, I wouldn't do that. And you're like, well, welcome to being Choctaw. Like, we don't have that choice. That's how we roll. Kind of stuff. So we have to take it. I don't have healthy boundaries. If somebody said that to me, I would be like, oh, I'm like super interested in this discussion now. What do you mean by that? What,
Yeah.
and, hey, I noticed this, and this about you. And, that doesn't seem to be in alignment, is a very interesting conversation versus, I'm not comfortable with XYZ, which may be a completely appropriate and healthy boundary for the person involved.
Well, I've seen, like you said, it, that middle, that balance in the middle. I mean, if they're too rigid, like I've seen a lot of people who come to the just come to the table with either trauma or just distrust of people, and they're waiting for that one small infraction so they can write that person off
Mhm,
completely. And so it's almost like, okay, finally just do the thing that I don't like so I can write you off completely
mhm,
and be so rigid. Or the people that no matter and sometimes it's just one person in their life, uh, parent, family member, romantic partner, friend, who can just take advantage of them so much, and they will show how flexible and how much they can bend. And no, it's fine, it's okay,
mhm,
it's okay. And you mentioned that at the beginning of your book, how many times we might say, oh, that's okay,
mhm.
and when it's really not, or when we really don't feel like it's okay, and we're disappointed in ourselves. When boundaries are so personal, is there a way we can know when we're not living in accordance with what our boundaries should be for us?
Yeah, and that's why I think so much really kind of difficult work needs to be done around it, of figuring out what that alignment is. And you mentioned like the gut reactions, which is something else I talk about in that book, is TLDR, but our gut really is a brain. And the enteric nervous system, if you disconnect it from the rest of the body, that's the nervous system in the gut will continue to operate independently. We have very weird little bodies. Our body's going to tell us something. And
Yes.
learning to listen to that, especially when we've turned off the thinking part of our brain, and learning to listen to those gut reactions is really important. Of going like, I'm not even quite sure why this is an issue for me, but I'm really responding. This Gavin de Becker's book, The Gift of Fear, is brilliant.
Mm.
And I'm board certified in hypnotherapy, so I kind of use that sort of the hypnotherapy perspective of, we're taking in so much stuff that's getting downloaded into the subconscious that the conscious mind is not paying attention to, but the body heard it, and the body's telling you, get the fuck out. And we need to learn to listen and respond to that. Is this like a trauma-based fear reaction, or is this my gut telling me something that I've been told not to listen to? Everybody has a story where they said, if I had listened to my gut, XYZ wouldn't have happened. And we need to get back to listening to that again.
Right, rather than seeing our bodily reactions as an annoyance or a
Right.
hindrance to,
Yeah, of
like, this is
curiosity, of
inconvenient.
saying when I'm having like this big somatic reaction, being curious about it. Oh, I'm really upset by this. I wonder where that's coming from. Is that trauma reaction stuff, or is my body telling me to get the fuck out? We have so much stuff that kind of bubbles up from the subconscious all the time. Um, I mean, my husband and I were in the car, different husband, obviously, uh, when, and we were listening to, the Casey Kasem, they do the classic countdown stuff on Sundays, which we listen to because we're old, as we go to the grocery store. And they were playing this song, and he's like, I don't remember this song. And I'm like, I remember it. It was from a movie. I don't know which one. And he's like, no, I don't remember this song. I don't remember this song at all. So I go to look it up, and I was like, oh, it was in Top Gun. It wasn't Take My Breath Away. It was the other, romantic song in Top Gun. He's like, oh my God, I had Top Gun scenes playing in my head as I was insisting that I didn't know this song. So it was like,
Wow.
yeah, his subconscious was like, dude, you know the song. Like, it was in that movie that you didn't really like that much. And so when we
Yeah.
start kind of listening to that, rather than going, that's weird. Why am I thinking about Top Gun? I don't know this song. We can have a different relationship with, our subconscious and our somatic reactions, and learn to trust ourselves and to calibrate, what is fucked up trauma shit, and what is authentic Danger Will Robinson, signs that we're getting from our bodies. You probably hadn't gotten to that part in the book yet, but I talk about,
Oh, yeah, no, not yet.
yeah.
I'm full disclosure. I'm on page 13 of this. I wouldn't want to bullshit you and say, "Oh, I've read the whole
Yeah,
thing."
that was
I
so
just
good. I
forgot it all.
remember that. That was really deep, Faith. What up? Yeah.
So I know a lot of people will want to know, okay, so there's the fucked up trauma reaction, and then like the Danger Will Robinson, something is going on. Maybe I just don't, it's on the tip of my tongue, but I don't know what it is. How do we know the difference?
Well, and that's where the curiosity comes into play, because we tend to judge our reactions. We tend to be like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, this guy's really nice. He bought you dinner. Why are you, nervous about getting in his car? Or whatever. And so I'm Buddhist. I've been practicing Buddhist for over 10 years. And so I love just approaching it with curiosity. That's kind of like, oh, where did that come from? And kind of unpacking and giving yourself a chance to figure out where the response is coming from without judgment, versus like, oh my goodness, you're being trauma reactive, going, oh yeah, I'm being really trauma reactive right now, is a completely different experience inside ourselves. And we're like, I'm having a hard time breathing. I'm having a panic attack. Yeah, that's what I do when I'm in an uncomfortable situation. So what do I do to work with this right now? It's completely different than, oh my God, stop. What are you doing? You're having a panic attack. You can't do this right now.
This is inconvenient for my to have this reaction.
Because good luck with that. You're not going to take control of that back. I talk in Unfuck Your Brain about that, of like, it's playing a tape. For those of you who remember cassette tapes, when you push play, the tape's playing. You can't yell at the tape player to make it stop. The tape is rolling, and it could be Nickelback, and you may have to scream your ass off, I hate Nickelback, but it's not going to stop the tape from playing. So we have to sort of work with that experience of being, curious about it, figuring out where it's coming from. What information do I need from this? I use the acronym AFGO a lot. Oh, I'm having another fucking growth opportunity. Cool. I needed that today. And just kind of being with it is recognizing that it's just information, and I can pay attention to what that information is telling me. Maybe the information is telling me, hey, based on past experiences, I don't think this situation is safe, when in fact the situation is safe. Or, hey, I'm reading stuff that, the conscious mind isn't paying attention to, and this situation is literally not safe. And so that we can kind of unpack in that moment of like, oh, this is mom stuff right now. This isn't about me. I'm having like attachment mom shit. So I don't have to react from that same place. I don't have to play the tape. And that curiosity sort of takes away the judgment of it.
It's that Buddhist approach to things. So there's the suffering. That's just being born, injured, sick, dying, getting hurt. And then the optional suffering of just like wishing it wasn't like this, or wishing it was different.
Yeah. And you've heard the expression, the pain is inevitable, but the suffering is optional. Like,
yes.
Things are going to be very, very painful, but getting hooked into that and the fighting with it is what, creates that layer upon layer of suffering. That is what makes it far more difficult to recover from, the pain of being human in the world.
God, it takes so much effort too. Just wishing it shouldn't be like this. It shouldn't be like this. So like in the military, we talk a lot of shit about the second lieutenant who gets a map and like gets lost like immediately. Like, I should be right here. We should be right. Well, sir, we're not. So how about we just figure out where the fuck we are so we can get where we're going a little sooner?
You're talking about the second lieutenant who commissioned straight in, never was a non-commissioned officer, doesn't.
Right.
No, my dad was career military. I'm with you. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And you're in a big military town there.
Yes, I am. Yeah. And in fact, there's a bumper sticker on my car that says witch doctor. So everybody in town knows me because I have the witch doctor sticker, but it was the VA docs that gave me that name.
Why do they call you the witch doctor?
They're like, I get a lot of people that are veterans, are active duty, and a lot of them don't want the stuff in they don't want the treatment in the VA system for whatever reason, or there's a lot of our VA's got fantastic practitioners, but there's a lot of structure and stuff in there, and they needed something a little more woo-woo, I guess. And so several years ago, one of the VA psychologists were like, you know what, just go, she's a witch. Like, we're not quite sure what she does, but people seem to get better when they see her. So just go see her. She's a witch. Because I have the same center for deployment psychology trainings and stuff, but then I can add, the woo-woo somatics. We can do the yoga, and we can do the hypnotherapy, and we can do the other stuff. And I have a postdoc in clinical nutrition. I've had a lot of people come back with inflammation or self-pathogens or stuff that they picked up overseas that then I can treat when, sort of modern medicine hasn't helped. And guess what? We have herbs that do. Right.
That have been around for quite a while.
Yeah. So, I can do a lot of that stuff by operating outside of that system. And so it's kind of a running joke. They're like, yeah, she's going to do some of her witchy voodoo shit, but just trust her.
Yeah, exactly. She'll slip some herbs in your mouth while you're doing yoga and you
Yeah,
just
it's going to be all
magically feel better.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I imagine, especially working with vets. I know one of the things that was difficult for me coming out of the military was accepting help in the first place and just getting over the fact that it was not a weakness to, get the counsel of somebody else who might be able to help me. What are some of the challenges, or what are some of the things you like about working with vets when they show up?
Well, I mean, first of all, I speak the language, because I grew up on military bases. One of my first jobs right out of high school was at DLI. I was a little baby GS3. So I understand, the culture, and I can speak to that, which I think is helpful. And
Yeah,
I like
definitely.
the pragmatism of working with vets. And I can just, like, in this room, I'm your CO and I'm saying you got to stop your shit. And they're like, yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Um, so I like that, I like being able to, not have to like tiptoe around and, worry about somebody's butt hurt. Like with vets, they're like, just like, if I'm being a fucking asshole, tell me I'm being a fucking asshole.
Yeah, just tell me.
Yeah. So I appreciate that. I've never had, and for the same reason, I love working with people with autism because
Yeah.
if something makes sense, they're willing to try it. Yeah. I'm not having tiptoe around, emotions and stuff nearly as much. And I
Yeah.
appreciate, and I also work with a lot of, first responders in general, police officers, sheriff's department and stuff. And I really appreciate the work that people have had these kind of experiences are doing to be okay. I had, police with all like the police officers shootings and stuff. I had a client tell me a couple of years ago, he's like, I see how we get there. Like we see really horrific, fucked up shit that we're then carrying around with us, and we haven't found a place to put it down. I don't want to be that person. And so people
Yeah.
that are out there seeking help are realizing that, it's for the benefit of them, their families, and really all of society to do that work.
That's a tough one because I think a lot of people are worried that if they talk about it, they're just going to be turned into a complete softy
Mhm.
and just emotional basket case and can't carry on with their job, when in fact it might just help them be more effective at,
Mhm.
profession, if they were not carrying around all this bullshit they don't need.
Yeah. Well, and also the language helps. I don't call it belly breathing when I'm working with y'all. I call it tactical breathing. It's
Yeah.
parasympathetic engagement training. Hooah.
Yes. I like that.
Yeah. So having a lingo that sort of makes sense with the worldview and the framework of everything else you've learned is also helpful. But like how do you come home is so difficult. I've had people say, like, I know how to be a warrior, I don't know how to be a husband, and having to, like, let's take all those other skills and apply it now to your relationship. You're not.
Yeah, the context of it.
Yeah.
True.
Is and it's it's very, and I've had people say, like, I'm just going to redeploy, I can do that well, I know how to do that. Well, let's take the
Yeah.
skills that you've learned from doing that to learn to be home.
That really puts it into perspective of how difficult it can be to do this work with the intangibles. We don't see these feelings. We don't see trauma. We experience it. But when people talk about it, and I'm one of them, man, I wish I was back in Iraq because this wouldn't be a problem. And how fucked up that is. Like, I would rather be in an active war zone where I
Yeah.
could get shot in the face or blown up or whatever than, have a difficult conversation with
With
my
somebody.
spouse.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. And I've had that conversation. I'm like, until you come back in a body bag, so let's just work on life instead. But that's and I tend to be a very practical type therapist. I'm not one of those, oh, so how are you feeling? I don't want people laying on my sofa and crying.
Yeah.
When people come in, I'm like, what are we working on today? And so that's also something that appeals, for people like, oh, I don't know if I want to try therapy or not. For those of you from those kinds of backgrounds, it's like, find somebody who's there to work. You probably are not going to want a therapist where you lay around and talk about your feelings and then don't do anything with it. finding somebody who's a little bit more solution focused or those kinds of things where you're doing functional work and that feels like less of a waste of time. Like, oh, I've got a really good strategy now for having this conversation or fighting better or, dealing with my feelings on this is also really, really helpful.
Yeah, that probably the biggest or the best things you could say to the law enforcement or veteran community is therapists might not be just there to listen to your problems so you can vent and then just go about your day as if nothing happened. One thing you mentioned, and I've read a little bit about it, but somatic
Mhm.
experiencing or some of Peter Levine's work. Can
Yeah.
you talk about how that relates to dealing with trauma and working with the body?
Yeah. So there's a lot of people, Peter Levine, as you mentioned, Bessel van der Kolk. A lot of their work actually comes from Eugene Gendlin's work in the 70s, which Peter Levine has definitely nodded to. And so when we talk about somatic experiencing, this is why it's interesting, and I'm getting into my professorial lesson, was Eugene Gendlin was working with couples, and he created something called focusing. And it's basically somatic experiencing. It's all just different words. We always have to have
Mhm.
our own word to have our own
Right.
brand.
Yeah.
Mine is Unfuck.
Reinvent it.
Yeah. He watched hundreds and hundreds of hours of tapes. Why did some couples get better and some couples not? Who's doing why did some people fix the relational problem and some people end up divorced? Like, it didn't seem to be anything about the problem. So how do some people do the work and some people struggle? And after watching tons and tons and tons and tons of video footage of these sessions, he realized that the people who got better were the people that were connected to their bodies, that
Mm.
they understood what was going on somatically in their bodies and could respond to that and process that. And so that's he came up with something called focusing, where it was about focusing inward and connecting somatically to your body. And so, Peter Levine, he wrote, Waking the Tiger, in an unspoken voice and all those books. And then Bessel van der Kolk wrote The Body Keeps the Score. And so a lot of people have, David Emerson, the trauma informed yoga, but all of those are basically sort of coming from Eugene Gendlin's work of it's all different ways of learning to understand your internal experiences. We have this idea, and there's nothing wrong with cognitive behavioral therapy. I teach cognitive behavioral therapy. I use cognitive behavioral therapy, but there's a fundamental problem with that idea of the top-down processing. That I have this thought, the thought informs the feeling, and that informs my body's reactions. When we know, and we were just talking about gut reaction stuff, that the
Yeah.
opposite is true. It's afferent. We're getting afferent messages from the body. It's a bottoms-up reaction, that we have a somatic reaction to what's going on. So, that goes up the vagus nerve, it hits the brain. And so by the time it gets to the middle part of the brain, the limbic system is going, oh, stomach's roiling, I must be anxious. And then the thoughts create a story around why I'm anxious. So it's coming from the body up, not the brain down. And once we start to, recognize what's going on in our bodies, that gives us a different thing to work with, and also gives us a chance to process out some of those things that we've been holding in our bodies as well. There's a lot of research that shows us why I said, trauma being an injury to the nervous system is, we know now with all this research with the vagus nerve and stuff, which of course people have been doing acupuncture for 3,000 years are saying,
Yeah.
yeah, that,
Yeah. Resounding no shit.
no
Right.
shit. Yeah. I'll put up a map of the do channel from acupuncture when I'm teaching, and people are like, oh, it's the vagus nerve. I'm like, no, this is a 3,000-year-old map of the do channel. What? Same thing. So when we get a chance to, actually work with the body specifically, then, we're processing things where they start rather than trying to kind of work our way back down.
That's
I
such a
noticed that a lot even years and years ago, before I didn't know Eugene Gendlin's work, but before I even discovered like Peter Levine and stuff, is that people could tell me what was going on in their bodies even when they couldn't necessarily tell me their thoughts and feelings.
That's a good point, because you're right that you feel it and then the brain searches for a reason. Why am I feeling like this? And creates that story.
Right.
That's such an important distinction right there, because then, it's not like we have to fix our thinking that will control the rest of our body. We can notice what's happening in our body and attend to that and
And,
decide.
we can still work with the thinking. That's why I'm saying I like CBT. I use CBT, but that it's not that top-down processing, that so we can still, when we realize, oh, that's a fucked up thought, how can I make that a more helpful, balanced thought? It's still helpful to the entire process. So it's not, saying, oh, CBT is useless. It's very helpful, but let's not say that the thought is the be all end all of the situation. And if we just control that, everything else will fall into place.
Yeah, it seems to fit in the paradigm that we are a being that lives just in our head, and our body is just something that we control rather than we are that total body. So, wow, we've covered quite a lot today. I know we've jumped all over the place. Man, I could talk to you for hours. Certain comments I heard, oh, we could go down that stream for quite a while. I really love talking about this stuff, and I really appreciate your time. Before we go, if this is resonating with some of our listeners, some of the things we talked about, where can they turn to? What should they be reading, or what are some next steps?
Well, from my work, I've got a bajillion books out at this point. I don't know. So you mentioned Unfuck Your Brain is kind of, it's the one that's been a bestseller, which is super cool and wasn't expected. And it really is about trauma. We're not calling it, hey, here's a book about trauma. This is going to be really embarrassing to carry up to the register.
Yeah.
But it really is about how trauma and traumatic experiences, wire the brain. So that's kind of the book that's a great starting point. And, you mentioned some of my other books, and I've, written books about coping skills specifically, and the difference between the mind and the brain and how coping affects those. And, so Microcosm Publishing is my publisher. And they have just an amazing website, like a very shut up and take all my money website. If your listeners have never, shopped on their website, they are very interested in publishing the stuff that no one else is interested in publishing. So you can kind of peruse and look around there. Then we mentioned, like, for the somatic stuff, Eugene Genlin's books on focusing, and The Body Keeps the Score, Bessel van der Kolk, stuff that Peter Levine has written are all really good books. David Emerson, if people are specifically interested in trauma-informed yoga, and those are all really good books about somatic experiencing. And I cannot remember the author's name because I haven't had my coffee yet, but Spiritual Bypassing is a really fantastic book as well, about how we don't deal with our shit because we're ascribing it greater meaning.
Oh, yeah. And in Northern California, I come across this on a daily basis, and I I love ascribing meaning to things, and it affects me so much because I am the type of person who wants to find meaning in like every single number I see on a receipt. So,
Well, that's what brains do, and I talk
yeah,
about that in Unfuck Your Brain. The default mode of the brain is the storytelling brain. That's how we make meaning of our world. That's how we hold pieces of information. We don't know, the story isn't necessarily true. We can go, oh, cool story, bro, to our own
cool
brain.
story, bro.
But
Yeah.
that's not actually what happened there. Or, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That story actually, does explain what's happening to me. Of just realizing that that's what we're doing, and it's something else to work with and not necessarily take us back.
That's great. Yeah, it's well, I'm going to suggest that people start with Unfuck Your Brain, and work their way through the different books as they see fit. And I will link to your publisher's website and your social media accounts. What else are you doing that people should be aware of, or where else can people find you?
Well, I'm in private practice in San Antonio, Texas, which because I get people that email me from all over the country saying, like, can we do phone therapy? Only licensed in Texas, so you have to be physically present in Texas, even if we're doing video or phone therapy. So I like to put that out there. Them's the rules. There is no
Yep.
national licensure, as you well know. I do a lot of teaching and events. I'm actually on the West Coast more often. I will be back in Portland, like in March. I'm going to be in Portland and Seattle. There is a conference, regarding the prison system that I'm keynoting at, and I'm going to be doing an event there at Pals, and another one back in Seattle. So if people follow me on social media, I tend to publish when I'm doing stuff.
And you have the best memes too, so I appreciate that.
Oh, yes, and I do love a good meme. I'll throw in some like really serious ones about trauma and stuff, and then there's pictures of my cats, and I should warn people, like, if you follow me, I don't like social media well. I just put up stuff that amuses me. I don't remember to hashtag, and I'm not like looking to expand my brand. If I find a funny picture of something at Target, that's what's going up.
I like that. Well, then I'll write the book Unfuck Your Hashtags, and so
There you
and you can read that.
go.
Faith, thank you so much for taking your time today. And like I said, I'll link to everything in the show notes here. And thank you for being a part of the show.
Thank you for having me. It was fun.
All right, you guys, that concludes today's episode of Transitions for More with me, Mike Ergo, joined by Faith Harper. I really hope you enjoyed it. You can follow the show on Instagram at Transitions for More. Join the TFW page on Facebook, Twitter, and transitionsformore.com. If you guys have any questions, comments, or topic ideas, hit me up, Mike at transitionsformore.com. If you guys enjoy the show, please leave us a rating and review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts, because that helps us reach the people who need to be reached. Thanks again to Faith. Awesome interview. Awesome woman. Doing great work out there. You guys need to buy her book. All the books. I'd say start with Unfuck Your Brain. Work your way through Unfuck Your Boundaries, Your Brain on Depression, Unfuck Your Intimacy. Get them all. Really good stuff. Really easy to understand, but packs a powerful punch. I'll put some links on how you can find those books too. That's it for now, you guys. Thanks for joining us this week, and until next time, remember to drink water, meditate, and kill bodies. Out.